Hey Sonia, thanks for joining us today. It's Saturday, I know, and you have a growing family, so I appreciate you taking the time out of your morning to talk to us. It's a topic I'm passionate about, and one I know you're passionate about too, and that being women's health, of course. Now, I'm fairly familiar with you, having worked with you in the past. Sorry you had to put up with me. Uh, However, I know some of our audience likely will benefit from getting to know you just a little bit better and your stories. So yeah, shoot, if you could just fill us in with who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Sonia Spil, and I am a functional health coach in the United States. I work with clients all over the world, Dubai, Australia, UK, all through the United States, South America. We meaning at Vidal Coaching, the company I work for, we sort of pride ourselves in working with some of the toughest cases. And I was originally one of those tough cases when I came over to Vidal. I spent a lot of my years in fitness. I was competing in women's bikini division bodybuilding. So I did that for a couple years, and it really takes a toll on your body. And as I was coming out of competing, I started to realize how much dysfunction I had even the years prior to going in. I realized that there was a lot of things like chronic bloating, loss of period, chronic hair loss, hypothyroidism that at 25, 26, a woman really shouldn't be experiencing. And even post competing, when my food came back up and I got body fat back on my body, none of it really improved. I actually had to go on full HRT. None of that worked. I had chronic inflammation. I had what we consider overactive immune disorder, which I'm happy to explain a little bit, which is just chronic immunological sort of inflammation inside of the body. And it doesn't always have an easy diagnosis because you can't visually see it on labs. Hypothyroidism is when your thyroid is low. You can visually see that on labs. And you can see some autoimmune conditions, but not all on labs. And I really struggled for about 4 years until I came for Vidal Coaching. Me being a coach myself, I had kind of seen some clients go through similarities, nothing as extreme as I was going through. But it wasn't really until I came over, I started understanding the depth in which my body had dysfunction, right? We kind of see this, we talk about root cause. And I know you've heard this term, and I know people listening have heard that that's the root cause. And it's like, oh, the root cause of this fatigue is hypothyroidism. It's like, but what's the root cause of the hypothyroidism? Gut issues. Well, it's like, but deeper than that, where did the gut issues come from? Immunological dysfunction inside of the gut. And at Vidal, we really go down to those levels. And I had never had somebody go to those levels with me before. And that's where the healing really began. And obviously was completely blown away. I, already being a bodybuilding coach myself, really saw a gap in the industry to combine physique athletes and hormonal dysfunction healing and, some sort of endocrine jump starting, if you will, post competing. And I came to the academy that we have through Vidal called Metabolic Mentor University and started training through that program in addition to the nutrition training I had already been doing with my clients. And that's when Vince and I had kind of connected and came over. And now I work under Vince Pistic, who's the owner of Vidal Coaching. Him and I work together to run the Priority Select program, which is where we deal with some of the toughest cases really in the world. For anything from the stuff we're going to be talking about today, perimenopause, amenorrhea, fertility issues, to Hashimoto's, Lyme disease, lupus, you name it, we pretty much deal with it. So that is a little bit about my journey.
Yeah, it's an amazing one. Thank you. I think if you spend enough time on forums like Reddit, and it can start to feel a bit overwhelming. It just seems like nobody ever actually gets better. Of course, that's a pretty skewed perspective, and people who are oftentimes posting those comments are the ones who are still sick, whereas people who have stopped posting obviously have gotten better, but
Yeah.
you don't hear about people who get better, just the ones who are still unwell. So, but yeah, no, what I mean is obviously is that there's a sort of statistical bias there. But Point is, evidently you were able to work through your issues, and it's amazing to hear. And obviously, Vidal is something we'll talk about a little more in a bit. Anyway, as I mentioned today, what I really want to pick up your brain about is women's health. There's obviously a lot to unpack, and generally, what I like to do before getting into the nitty gritty of the conversation is to start breaking down some of the sort of complex physiology that sort of underpins the rest of the conversation. It also makes for great reels and shorts, so that's a win. Anyway, I think a great place to start would be to really sort of at a high level, break down what hormones are.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're a term that get thrown around a lot, and ultimately, they're just signaling molecules. But I think people look at them as purely these sorts of things that are involved in reproduction, and maybe, as you alluded to earlier, thyroid, and that's it. I could rant on about it myself, but I think you do a far more eloquent job sort of highlighting exactly what they are. So could you just,
We'll
at a high
try.
level,
Yeah.
sort of break down what these molecules are?
Yeah. Absolutely. So you really nailed it. I always say at a very easy to understand level, hormones are messages. If you think about the postal system, we get a message, we get a piece of mail in the mailbox, we read it. It's like, oh, it's time for a doctor's visit. It creates a reaction for us to act on something, right? Oh, this bill is due. Now we have to pay the bill. Oh, it's a letter. We feel joy. Oh, it's a Christmas card. We feel excited. These are messages that we receive, right? And inside of the body, there are these same messages. And when one gets sent and received, it triggers the body in a response. It tells the body something. And we can have dysfunction on all sorts of levels. But, really when it comes down to it, women's health, metabolism, mood, energy levels, they're all really tied to hormone balance and key hormones for women, and men, but estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, they fluctuate cyclically throughout a month. And they really influence how women feel, how women function, and how they even metabolize nutrients, which we've talked about a lot, just one-on-one, about sort of nutrient uptake being very different depending on hormonal function. When it comes to estrogen, it's actually estrogens. They're like three sisters and they work synergistically together. But how estrogens work in the body is they really are, their main roles are growth and maintenance of reproductive tissues. They support bone density, cardiovascular health, muscle building. They promote healthy mood. They enhance serotonin, dopamine activity. They boost insulin sensitivity, meaning that your body is able to sort of use glucose better. It really helps with what we call carbohydrate metabolism, but it's basically how easy is it for you to gain weight from eating carbs, which is why in perimenopause, estrogen declines, you see that insulin insensitivity increase. And like I said, really the influence on mood, energy, metabolism, like when you have low estrogen, you'll typically be more depressed. You can be more anxiety ridden. It really does help sharpen cognitive function. So when we see a decline in estrogens, we see cognitive function decline as well. And this can happen in men and females. Estrogen plays such an important role in men as well. I think sometimes we think, oh, estrogen's bad in men, or we hear estrogen dominance and we just think crushing estrogen is the way to prevent cancer and do all these things. And it really has one of the most vital roles inside of the body. Single-handedly, I think for women, estrogen is one of the master modulators, really, because it affects so much. And the decline in estrogen specifically is where you see that big shift in perimenopause. Yes, higher estrogen, can cause issues, and we can talk about that later on when we dive in more. And then you have the estrogen sister, progesterone, and this is kind of like our calming hormone, right? And progesterone, the primary roles are really to support pregnancy, really prepare the uterine lining, balance the effects of estrogen. So we really want it to yin and yang very well together. It promotes more of a calming anti-anxiety effect. So it really works with interacting with GABA receptors. It's more calming, stabilizing, can really help promote better sleep quality. It does slow metabolism and can decrease insulin sensitivity, meaning when progesterone is highest around ovulation and the luteal phase, which we'll talk about, you might be more sensitive to carbs. Like you're not able to process them as well. Does that mean you should need them? No, you still need carbs, and we'll talk about all that. But it really is interesting to see that when estrogen is in its peak phase, you're really just able to perform better. You're really able to eat more carbohydrates. Glucose metabolism is at its optimal levels. And then when progesterone is really running the show, it's not necessarily the complete opposite, but it definitely slows down that process. So things to consider when we're talking about cycle. I'll dive into this a little bit more when we talk about the luteal phase and the menstrual phase, but it is interesting to see how they work so well together, but they have such vast roles inside of the body. And then we have testosterone. Testosterone for women is just as important for men. I would say for men, testosterone is their vitality hormone. For women, estrogen is our vitality hormone. But testosterone still plays a massive role in libido, muscle growth, maintaining lean muscle mass, just kind of like mood as well. It really can increase motivation and energy. And again, helps maintain higher metabolism through muscle maintenance. So the more muscle you have, the higher your metabolism as well. And, you know, it's always so, I don't know if you remember the movie Fantasia. Do you remember the Disney movie Fantasia? And Mickey Mouse, he was like an orchestra,
Yeah.
right? And he was like always controlling these things. That's sort of what's happening. Women's hormones are changing every 5 to 7 days, really. We're having these huge shifts and fluctuations. They all really work together. Like I said, estrogen and progesterone, they balance each other. Estrogen is energizing and mood lifting, and progesterone's calming and stabilizing. And when we have an imbalance in those levels, you see more mood swings, anxiety, irritability. This is where you'll hear more like PMS symptoms happening. And together, like I said, all three of these hormones, testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, they move throughout. And so if you're cool with us just moving over, we can dive into menstrual cycle as well.
Oh yeah, no, all I was going to that was great, thank you. I'd love to sort of ask a quick question first, though, is sort of how, I mean, obviously estrogen and progesterone are the main two hormones in a woman's cycle that regulate it. How much does testosterone in particular fluctuate, though, within that cycle?
Yeah, so we really have more. I would say testosterone is more of the most stable in the menstrual cycle, but it does fluctuate around ovulation. So it's sort of moderate in the luteal phase. I always say halftime, showtime, ovulation, it'll come up and then it'll come back down. And it can be a little bit lower towards the end of cycle. Now, if you have endocrine disorders, PCOS, some of these other symptoms, it might actually be a higher fluctuation in changing that can prevent the signaling in the body's ability to release an egg, which we'll talk about more with PCOS, but it is the most stable of the women's hormones. Like it's the one that we don't have to worry about kind of the rising and changing quite as much. We have a strong increase around ovulation, which can sometimes cause more like acne. Women will, I'm breaking out. Sometimes that can be a steep rise in testosterone, but for the most part, it's the most stable.
Yeah, that was a perfect explanation. Thank you. Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is to sort of quash the notion that these hormones are sort of gender specific, and you get, as you alluded to yourself, you get like people will talk about male hormones and female hormones, and it does drive me a bit dilly because we all have these hormones just in varying ratios and amounts. Obviously, men, as you alluded to, are generally speaking more testosterone driven, and women are estrogen driven. And the way I like to explain it is that fundamentally, these hormones aren't gender specific; they just drive development of sexual characteristics associated with those genders. So, estrogen will drive more breast development. And those sorts of characteristics. Sonia, I'd love it if you could sort of, maybe we could transition now to talk about the menstrual cycle. Again, it's something that is mentioned a lot, but I don't think, most men have no clue what it is, which is important to know, especially
Yeah.
if you're in a relationship. It helps you to understand your partner just a little bit more effectively. But also, I think it's going to be fairly critical to the rest of our conversation. So could you, just run us through the basics of the menstrual cycle and the four phases thereof?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think this is really important to understand because you said a really great thing. Most men don't understand it, but I would almost challenge that thought. Most women don't even understand that. I have an ebook, and maybe we can link it. It's a free sort of PDF ebook about mastering your menstrual cycle, because I talk to women all the time and I have to explain to them, oh, this is where you're on your cycle. Can I explain to you what that means? And they had no idea that that influenced that much, from digestion to mood to sex drive to skin conditions. It really plays a huge role. And when you understand it, there are so many aha moments. And I don't think it's kind of hard to compare UK and US education, but in the US, we don't really explain the menstrual cycle. We just know it happens, the uterine lining sheds, but we don't know what's going on. And so when we break it down, like you said, into four phases, we have what's called the follicular phase, and that would be between days 1 and 13. The hormone that's rising during this time is estrogen. So estrogen is, like we said, it's going to be your more vitality hormone, typically more creative during this time, less anxiety, you're feeling stronger, better glucose metabolism. Progesterone is lower during this time. Digestion might even be better during this time. You're more optimistic. You're like, I'm gonna go out and this is where you're like brainstorming. You're like, why do I feel so creative all the time? Well, check where you're at in your cycle. Higher, like I said, higher insulin sensitivity, better for more intense workouts, even if you're like HIIT training. But again, you'll feel stronger during this time as well. Ovulation is typically, depending on female, between days 12 and 15. It can fluctuate in there, which is important to know to prevent pregnancy. But really, estrogen peaks during this time and testosterone surges. So that's why you can see a strong increase in sex drive, motivation, endurance, strength during this time as well. And then metabolism is, again, at its all-time highest during ovulation. This is where you can actually like get away with eating more, even if you're in a deficit or a dieting phase. Have ovulation time be your refeed time, or where you're going out and having a free meal or doing something like that, because your body's going to utilize it so much better and you're going to be at peak performance. So it's, again, really good time for strength training. If you're going to do HIIT training, this is where you'd want to put it around your cycle. And then the luteal phase is what comes after that. This is where I'd say all the magic really happens in the first 14 days. And it's the second 14 days that really can be a little bit hard when you're going into the luteal phase. So the first thing to remember too is, after any strong increase in hormones, a sudden drop off is always going to feel much more abrasive, if you will. And so as you enter the luteal phase, there is a strong drop off in the hormones, and it really kind of almost crashes down, which can create more of like almost a stress, depressed, maybe more melancholy feeling, maybe a decrease in sex drive around this time for a day or two. And then hormones really start to rise in the second phase. And if you sort of think about, to give listeners a visual, when we ovulate, our follicle drops, and so we have this sort of like outer fluffy shell, and an egg is released, and this outer fluffy shell is the corpus luteum. It's sort of the modulator for progesterone. And if you don't have ovulation, you don't have the progesterone created, because you don't have that fluffy outer shell. And honestly, even in pregnancy, that fluffy outer shell will stay until, middle of the first trimester. And that's what's creating the progesterone to really secure the pregnancy. That is different in so many women. And the more stressed you are, the less of a response you might have in ovulation, or if you're under eating chronically. And if that ovulation doesn't happen and that corpus luteum isn't created, you won't have a rapid increase in progesterone, and you will have a rapid increase in anxiety during the second phase. Yeah. And that's really
that drop off in GABA.
Exactly. Yes, 100%. And our neurotransmitters are, look, we could dive into that in that's a whole other podcast. Yeah. they are who we are. They influence who we are, from how we react to situations to how we feel about the world. And this is where you might even feel like more, do I want to be in this relationship? Do I like my job? Like, you start to question things and you don't know why suddenly you're questioning them. Look where you're at in your cycle. You're like, oh, I just ovulated. My hormones are coming down. That's what's going on.
Yeah,
So,
it's yeah. I'll let you finish. Then I will go on a tangent. So let me. I'll
yeah.
shut up.
So both hormones kind of come crashing down, and then we start to have this rise from in progesterone, and the progesterone rising is in the body is thinking, okay, if there was sperm and we are impregnated, the progesterone is going to rise to hold that pregnancy. It figures out by day 28 that you're not pregnant, and it comes crashing down, and there's no need to keep creating it, and that triggers the response of the menstruation. But during the luteal phase, again, initially calm, more stable, then maybe a little bit more anxious, moody, irritable. Again, this is where you'll start to see in the later luteal phase, when hormones come down again for the decline, which triggers the menstruation, more anxiety, trouble sleeping, reduced insulin sensitivity. This is typically where you will see also a slowdown in digestion. I'll hear clients say, oh, I don't know what it is. It's something I'm eating, but sometimes it's fine. And then sometimes I'm backed up or I'm more gassy. And I would almost challenge people to say, well, note that where that gassiness is happening around your menstrual cycle, because in the luteal phase, it's very common to feel slowdown in digestion because of the increase in progesterone slows down motility. And then you have a decrease in insulin sensitivity. You could be holding more water as well. This is where you're like, why did I love myself 10 days ago? And I look in the mirror and I just have the worst things to say about myself, which women do. We're like, wait, I just wore this dress 10 days ago and I loved it. And now I put it on and I literally can't even look at myself in the mirror. Like, these feelings that you're feeling, women listening, they're normal. Like, they are happening for a reason. You're not crazy. Your hormones are changing your body ever so. I mean, if you really think about hormones changing this much in just 1 month, it's a lot. And so understanding what's going on, you can have a little bit less of a reactive response to a lot of situations. And you can have more of a response looking at yourself of, is this something that I'm feeling internally and not an external situation that's making me feel this way? And sometimes when we can stop and go, oh, I just ovulated. I don't hate my job. I don't not like this person. I'm fine. I'm just going to sit in these feelings for a minute. It'll pass and you won't be so reactive to life. So there really are so many benefits in understanding your cycle. Like I said, luteal phase, better time for a little bit higher fat diet, more like yoga, long walks, going for a hike, still strength training, but not necessarily HIIT training during this time. Really nurturing your recovery, nurturing self-care during this time. And then we go into the menstruation phase, which is, some people say it's the end of the cycle. It's actually the beginning of the cycle. And that is really days 1 through like 5 to 1 through 6, depending on who you are and what your cycle is like. This is where all hormones are low estrogen, low progesterone. And then at kind of the end, as your estrogen goes up, your cycle will decrease in blood flow and it'll normally get a little bit darker. And that's where your energy will start to come back. This is typically where you're low energy because hormones are so low, potentially more fatigued, kind of wanting to sleep, not wanting to leave the house. Lower energy can mean also lower appetite as well. Sometimes people will get very hungry at the end of their luteal phase, and then they start their menstruation and they're almost like, I don't want to eat anything. Completely normal. Your metabolism is slowing down due to the low hormones. It's kind of like a little bit of like a taste of perimenopause, and your body is just reacting to that. This is where like yoga, walking, going to get a pedicure, a massage, spending times with friends is really sort of the most optimal during that time. So understanding how they fluctuate throughout the menstrual cycle can really, like I said, empower women to understand what's going on, how to optimize their nutrition, how to change their training around, and really how they can look at themselves first before reacting to life situations.
I have so many questions. We
Yeah.
might just throw out the script. Start off with, there's been a lot of there's some data to show that women who are on the contraceptive pill, as you've just alluded to, hormones have this incredibly powerful bidirectional relationship with neurotransmitters, which, as you said, fundamentally shape who we are as an individual. And when you start messing around with hormones, quote unquote, you alter your perspective and your sort of view on reality.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not stoned, but you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
And there is some data to suggest that women who are chronically on the pill for maybe controlling hormones in the respect of helping skin breakouts and things like that, then will potentially choose a life partner or mate, husband, or etc. that they wouldn't normally do when they are when they would be off the pill, or when they meet this person, then they decide to have children. They transition off this medication, obviously, so that they can become pregnant, and then all of a sudden their values don't change, but their perspective around that individual changes.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that at all? It's something I've I'm not that well read into, but I do find quite fascinating.
Yeah, I'd love for there to be, there's, this from working in the industry, but women's research is just lacking, like, for so many reasons, and there's a lot more perimenopause, postmenopausal research, and there's a lot of research when it comes to estrogen-based cancers, but as a whole, women's hormones is just an under-researched area. But I have heard this perspective from Dr. Carrie Jones, talks about it a lot, that the decrease in progesterone specifically really does influence your mate and your how attractive you are to your partner. And that's why I always tell people, like, in your luteal phase, if you're thinking, like, do I even like this person? The sound of them chewing is driving me crazy. And all of a sudden you're like looking at someone else. Like, don't ever react in those moments, because it's a temporary decrease and your progesterone crashing. It's not how you're actually viewing the world. It's the sharp change in things like neurotransmitters. I'd also like to add into, like, there is a massive increase for both suicide and anxiety in women who are on birth control. And that has been published multiple times again over in the American Psychiatric Medicine journals. And it is kind of ignored. I feel like people are like, oh, the blood clots. And it's like, let's talk about the rising rates of anxiety in women who are on the pill and how much that influences people. It's a moneymaker, kind of, because if you're on the pill, now you're on anti-anxiety medication. It's a cycle, right? And so why stop the money train? But it really is so important to understand this, because sometimes we are looking at depression and anxiety as something that I need a medication for. And there are times and places, but nutrient deficiencies, birth control robs, not to go on a tangent, birth control robs a lot of vital nutrients from the body, a lot of B vitamins and folate, which can cause mood disorders. And then on top of that, progesterone, like we said, is calming. It's GABA. It's the one that helps us sleep. It reduces anxiety. And when you suddenly have a change where you're not having that hormone and you're not having that response in your body of calming, you see the world through a lens that you have never seen it, and you don't understand. And your only solution is medication. And so I challenge people to look at their hormones before they look at their next prescription medication for mood disorders. I mean, bipolar, there are so many exceptions, but when it comes to anxiety and depression, because hormones in women and men play such a huge role, that's always the route I would go first.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, especially with regards to your comments about there not being that much research done into women's health, especially sort of prior to peri and menopause. Obviously, I think the biggest body of evidence, or not evidence, but research done there is probably the Women's Health Initiative, which retrospectively is probably almost useless now, because all it suggested was that if you take hormones, you're going to die.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll bypass that one. And yeah, again, I couldn't agree more. I think as a society, we tend to sort of go down this very sort of reductionist, reductionist approach, whereby we just sort of look at things at the sort of the visually the lowest common denominator. So person is depressed. Well, okay, why? Because serotonin is low. Okay, well then let's just increase the serotonin and just bypass the fact that the person's inflamed. They have tanked hormones, they have immune dysfunction at all levels, and yeah. Yeah, in a minute, I'd sort of like to sort of jump into a few more specific questions, but just going back to the menstrual cycle quickly, you did talk about how women should potentially train around their menstrual cycle. Obviously, in the context of, say, something like, let me rephrase that. How would a woman who's potentially a professional athlete sort of utilize that approach? Or would that then go out the window when you're sort of taking competition into account? Obviously, women's cycles don't all match up at the same time. So how would you generally work with someone who has got athletic goals?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And sometimes we have to give up to go up, right? What are we willing to sacrifice when it comes to women's competitive sports, gymnastics, cheer, bodybuilding? There is a lot of amenorrhea, which is lack of the menstrual cycle. And that happens the lower the body weight and the higher the training, the higher the stress load. Some things you can do to prevent. So I do have clients that I work with who are training for something, but they also have a goal of maybe, let's say, fertility. And it may be not a short-term goal, a long-term goal in the next year or two. They want to get pregnant. And so one of the things that you can do that's a low-hanging fruit is your workout nutrition increases around different parts of your cycle. So we call it cycle syncing, is sort of like the term that we use in the industry. And I do talk about this in the ebook as well, that when we have that surge in estrogen, we can push harder. So maybe, let's say you're training for a marathon. When you're training for a marathon, you can do both endurance training and interval training. And the interval training will actually help with your endurance training long term, and it can help get your minute mile time. So maybe during your follicular into ovulation, you're doing more interval, longer runs. And then in your luteal phase, you're doing more a strong increase in fats. You're keeping calories high enough. You're really making sure that you're also obviously taking care of nutrition, but maybe you're going into a little bit more like endurance runs with longer recovery.
Tempos,
Yeah. With food, like I said, whatever you do, protect your ovulation. Don't fast over ovulation. I have a lot of clients who fast, and like, we're not, unless we're working through like a severe autoimmune case, like we are not fasting over ovulation. It is so important to be eating during that time. I've watched women do it and it'll create dysfunction in their cycle. Eating enough and really nurturing your body during that time. You can push hard, like your hormones are optimal for pushing, but you have to eat enough to support that as well. So really making sure that's in there. Some additional things that I really like to add in, a product from Metagenics called Caprix, which is a SCRM, which is basically a product that sort of modulates in the body different responses, and we use them for insulin and inflammation and so many different things. Caprix is specifically for inflammation, so decreasing inflammation in the body, cold plunges, products like EPA, DHA, omegas, anti-inflammatory diets. So important, because if you're going to be training really hard, the little things, I always say that the little fucks don't matter as much if you're not pushing yourself, but they matter a whole lot more when you're going to be optimal in your performance and you still have hormonal goals, which is to maintain cycle, or maybe it's fertility long term. And that would be micronutrients, minerals, hydration, all those little key nutrients that, believe it or not, make a huge difference in your body's ability to respond to stress as well. So stress recovery, nutrient intake, and then training timing all come into consideration.
Thank you for that. That was a perfect answer, and we'll definitely link your ebook in the show notes. I think that would definitely help, because we've covered a lot of information there. Sonia, I sort of, I won't go off on a tangent. I was going to ask about pro-resolving mediators, but we'll do that another time. Anyway, okay, so talking about women's health, obviously you deal with a lot of conditions such as PCOS and endometriosis, which strangely share an etiology, in the sense that, especially if you look at it from this immune-centric approach. I think first, though, before we sort of maybe dive into some of those specific health issues, it would be it would be a good idea to sort of understand why these issues are starting to become more and more prevalent.
Yeah.
Obviously, things like endocrine disruptors are an issue, and we live in this sort of toxic milieu, which obviously doesn't help. And of course, genetics are a huge factor as well. And then, as I learned when working with you guys, blood sugar and the dysregulation of blood glucose has a huge impact. But sort of beyond those particular issues, as it were, can you elaborate as to why you think, just generally speaking, women are facing more and more of these issues?
Yeah. So I'm so glad we're bringing this up because there is an increase, right? In conditions like PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and endometriosis, which is where you basically have lesions and growths, estrogen increases in these people as well. We've really seen significant increases in recent decades, and decreases in fertility. And there's also an increase in weight loss resistance in a lot of women as well, so struggling to maintain, healthy weight despite their dieting and exercise efforts. There are a lot of different reasons, and so I think you really nailed it. So environmental and better diagnosis. This would be awesome. Endometriosis. I still have clients coming down from Canada to go to New York to pay out of pocket to see a doctor just to get a diagnosis. PCOS is a little bit different. I feel like anytime you have a syndrome, so a syndrome is really a cluster of symptoms. And so irritable bowel disease is a disease. Irritable bowel syndrome is what they tell you when they don't really know what's going on and they just want to slap a sticker on it, And so PCOS can be like that. It has very, very textbook diagnosis, but you'll see people with irregular cycles just get slapped with PCOS and put on birth control without really doing ultrasounds on the ovaries, the right kind of testing. So between the two, sometimes you can see a difference. It's kind of hard to get an endo diagnosis. It's very easy to get a PCOS diagnosis, it should really be the opposite. And so better awareness and better, that would be one thing, right? More awareness in the medical field. I can't even get started there. Environmental and lifestyle issues. So you nailed it. Endocrine disrupting chemicals. So these are, when we think about a very easy way to explain this to people is imagine, those kids games and they're like a square, a circle, and a rectangle. And you put the square in the square peg and the rectangle peg, they all fit. That is messenger. We talk about hormones, right? Those are the messages. Every receptor has a certain, shape, and estrogen fits in the estrogen receptor on the cell. These endocrine disrupting chemicals can go into the receptor. They kind of set themselves, these chemicals or look enough that they fit into the receptor, but they're not. This is where you'll see people who are estrogen's increasing because some of these chemicals are sitting in the receptor telling the body to increase estrogen. We put these on our body, on our face, in our hair, on our scalp. We shampoo. They're on my desk. They're everywhere. And I watch this because obviously I'm very aware of this. And I have a 10-year-old daughter and she loves to go to Bath and Body Works and all these places. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is we can't even smell these smells right now. They're so bad.
Yes.
It's really hard to get a young girl to understand.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, how this affects her long term. But I cannot stress enough how much this greatly influences fertility, weight gain, and hormonal function as a whole. It is extremely unregulated. Go ahead.
And these are called xenoestrogens, is that right?
These are xenoestrogens, particularly this would be BPAs, but also parabens can also affect the same thing. Yeah. They go in and disrupt the whole endocrine system gets dysregulated. And so when we talk about how much hormones really play a role in even the release of an egg, menstruation, when we start to have dysfunction in this, our body wasn't meant to take in these chemicals. The amount of chemicals in the US is obviously
horrendous.
Extremely dysregulated.
We're not far behind.
Yes, exactly. And so we start to see things like parabens, things like fragrance that really are known to protect.
Phthalates, yeah.
Yeah, phthalates, yeah, to not only affect fertility, but to also be somewhat carcinogenic as well. We do have a site that anyone can go on, and it's for all products around the world, and it's called the EWG. And you can go in, it's also an app, and you can scan your products. It'll tell you what they have in them. And I wouldn't say go out and get rid of everything, but you do really need to be understanding that this is a big deal. This isn't like I have a lot of tin hat things. This is not a tin hat thing. This is very real. The research is there. We know this to be true. This isn't an assumption like glutathione and cancer treatment. Like, this has research. We know these disrupt hormones. We know this for a fact. And so when you're intaking these things as a young kid, all the way through, the creation of your hormones, it's very easy. You think you're at 9, 10, 11, 12, you get your cycle. You already have 3 years of exposure to these chemicals. When your cycle does come, now it's dysregulated. You have painful periods. Now you slap birth control on it. The hormones are still being dysregulated underneath that birth control. It can create a lot of issues from a young age. And you'll start to see an increase in these issues from a young age when you look through time, which is why birth control is so common, even in young females, 12, 13, 14, is because their cycles are so painful and their hormonal issues are so severe that the only thing the doctors can really do, rather than obviously detox or educate, which would be the obvious ones, is to put them on birth control, completely suppress the period. Now we have an influx in anxiety, depression, all these things. PCOS is really an androgen dominance issue, and estrogen and endometriosis is really an estrogen dominance issue. Both can be missed on labs. How estrogen is created in the body and how it's detoxed in the body aren't always tracked in serum levels. Estrogen can go through 3 detox phases. One is very nurturing and protecting and healing for the body. And then methylation kind of occurs to kind of carry it out. We have glucuronidation, which is where it would kind of be broken down inside of the gut and flushed out through feces. And when we have dysfunction in sulfation pathway, right? And when we have dysfunctions in these areas, which these chemicals in general can throw off, estrogen can recycle. So instead of flushing out, it actually comes in and it like kind of goes to detox and then recycles in the body, kind of go to detox and then recycles. And genetically, this is where genetics play such a big factor.
Yeah, those CMT pathways and etc.
Yeah. And you have things like your CYP pathways, and those really influence, is estrogen growth promoting for you? If it's not, great. If it is, and you have an increase in estrogen and estrogen's growth promoting, you are looking at an increased risk of endometriosis, fibroids, breast cancer, ovarian cancer. And that's just facts. Does it mean if you have this that you need to have your breast removed or you're going to get cancer or you have to suppress your hormones? Not at all. It's just important to be aware of that, because you can support detox very easily. It's very inexpensive. Supporting detox is one of the easiest things you can do. It's a lot easier than getting endometriosis surgery, but you don't know that until you really look at these genes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you brought up a good point there just regarding the HRT, which I want to come back to later. But it does drive me nuts that so many doctors will just take, what are those patches called? We've got them over here in the UK. Evangeline or something like that, and they just give it to menopausal pre and postmenopausal women who are struggling with their hormones without any further consideration of how a woman is actually supposed to handle estrogen. They don't look at any of these sort of genetic potential SNPs that they may have that sort of indicate whether a woman can actually handle a large amount of estrogen. And I think it does drive. It is a cause for concern, because then all of a sudden, as you mentioned earlier, if a woman has a particular disposition for the development of something like breast cancer in later life, and you just slap her with a large amount of estrogen in a sort of a cookie cutter HRT model, then all of a sudden you're creating a problem, and it's just not thought out, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be. Anyway, we'll come back to that later. I'd sort of also love it if you could sort of really sort of talk to the stress point as well. I think when we talk about the reasons for these conditions becoming more and more prevalent, picking on things like like these chemicals in the environment is easy. Like the food is easy, but I don't think people understand the role that stress plays, and especially psychological stress. And ultimately, the body doesn't understand stress as anything more than stress. So, when you're stressed, cortisol goes up more. You end up with the liver pumping out more glucose, glycogen, and then you end up with that aspect of it. And again, I will butcher it. So would you be able to speak to that as well?
Yeah. So great point too. When cortisol goes up as the body's response to fight or flight to get the body moving from a stressful or harmful situation, glucose is dumped into the system. When we have that time and time over again, we can have high blood sugars. High blood sugars create more inflammation. High blood sugars and insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance go hand in hand for PCOS. The higher the insulin, the more dysregulation in signaling into the ovaries. That can raise an increase in what's called the luteinizing hormone, LH, which will signal more testosterone, which will create an androgen dominance area, which creates the inability for the female to actually ovulate. And rather than dropping a follicle, it's sort of like gets ready to drop a follicle and it turns into a cyst. Gets ready to drop a follicle and turns into a cyst. And so polycystic, many cystic ovaries is where we have that cycle that we just kicked off. Being stress is one of them, where because of blood sugar dysregulation, LH is signaling higher, testosterone increases, we can't ovulate, we have this buildup of cysts on the ovaries, and it creates more and more dysfunction, inflammation, and it kind of goes down the whole gamut. Stress itself, high cortisol decreases progesterone. Now, this is for a good reason. When we're in a stressful situation, we don't want to be conceiving, right? This is like, oh, this is perfect. But if you want to conceive, this doesn't work. If you want to have a balanced hormonal cycle, this also doesn't work, because when we have a decrease in progesterone and an increase in estrogen, we have estrogen dominance, we have more anxiety, more PMDD, more PMS. Higher estrogen means more risk of not detoxing it correctly. Genetic factors come into play here as well. Cortisol, stress as a whole. This is always kind of a hard topic because I see a lot of Dutch testing where we can see cortisol along with hormones. People don't even realize how stressed they are until you show them like a 4-point cortisol reading with a weighted average. Like, this isn't lying to us. This isn't because you were scared to get your blood drawn. This is kind of a truth. Stress is so many things. Stress is my kids jumping out of the bathroom and scaring me. That's a stress. It's fun. I love it. We laugh. If my body doesn't always like think, oh, this is so much fun. I can feel the cortisol. That's like when you get scared at a scary movie. That's that response. It's a hard conversation. It's losing a loved one. It's loss of a job. It's divorce. But it's also not having that conversation in your relationship that you really need to be having. It's not setting boundaries with your friends. It's not setting boundaries at work. It's sitting in traffic. It's your workout. It's your HIIT training that you're so addicted to. That's a stressor.
Fasting.
Yes, fasting can be a stressor. Under eating, chronic dieting. These are all big stressors on the body. And unfortunately, now more than ever, in so many beautiful ways, women are working more than ever. But this isn't like a political viewpoint, but our bodies weren't meant to endure the same sort of stress as men's bodies are meant to endure. Men really manifest stress cardiovascularly and in hair loss. Like, that's where men will show it. Women really, their stress really affects their hormones. And because, as we discussed in the beginning, it's an orchestra and everyone's relying on the other hormones to make a change and a fluctuation to make the next response, right? Because there are messages getting sent that create a response inside of the body. When that's dysfunctional, it triggers, it's like a domino falling, right? We have more immunological situations than ever because of hormonal dysfunction. Blood sugar regulation due to high cortisol, the immune system function goes up when insulin and blood sugar goes up as well. And we have immunometabolism. So we have an increase in the immune system upticking, which creates more autoimmune conditions, which I would arguably say endometriosis and PCOS are immunological conditions. They're endocrine immunological conditions. And we have so many others as well. We do see even postmenopausal women almost manifesting as autoimmune diseases because of the decrease in sudden drop off in their hormones.
Yeah.
Combined with high stress during that time. Unresolved trauma is a chronic stress, a low-grade chronic stress. Unresolved infections. So this is a huge one. I'll see too is maybe you have a cavitation, not a cavity, hear me out. Cavitation, which is deeper than that. It's in the root, in between the tooth and the actual jaw. You can get little infections and they're low grade. Maybe you'll have one or two. Your immune system can downregulate. It can cause higher blood sugars because your body's constantly fighting and again, create this cascade of a hormonal effect. So there really are so many reasons, which is why it's important to work with somebody who understands and can help you navigate, because in the world of, just all the things we talked about, somebody could be listening right now and be like, I'm all of those things and none of those things. They're like, I relate to everything that you're saying. And I think with hormone dysfunction and women and hormones, each individual person has their own sort of like code, whether it's their combination of stress, genetics, and blood sugar, but it's all very unique to how their blood sugar is raising, what kind of stress they're experiencing, what their dieting history is, what their hormonal history is. And so navigating sort of those 4 pieces of each woman is so important in creating a plan to help them find sort of that peak optimal performance.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Literally, I couldn't have. That was amazing. Thank you. And it was. We'll have to have a podcast, I think, on immunometabolism at some point. Sonia, I'd sort of definitely like to maybe go into how you start resolving this in a little while. But first, I'd sort of like to maybe have a discussion around the fertility side of things. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of overlap here, specifically because a lot of the issues that's you've already mentioned, things like PCOS and endometriosis, do directly affect fertility. But just in your practice and in your view, what are the, and you probably will have exactly the same answers again, I'd imagine, but what are you, in your view, are the main drivers of infertility with the women that you do see? Obviously, there's 2 sides to that conversation, because there is also the male component there. But from the female side, what are the main issues that you see nowadays just regarding fertility?
This is such a great question, and really a topic I'm so passionate about, especially being diagnosed with infertility for so long, and I'm currently expecting, so we're 5 months along right now. Yep.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure 10 years ago. And then even more recently went through some more testing and they were still like, you will have to do IVF. That is a guarantee. And we had an accident, not an accident. We're so grateful, but it can happen. And so that really comes through healing the immune system as well. I would say outside of the things we already discussed, PCOS, endometriosis, very basic hormone dysfunction, which you can see and doctors will catch and a fertility clinic will catch. Some of the most common missed things, and we do work at Vidal with a lot of fertility cases and a lot of sort of failed IVF cases, is the immune system. We talked about the immune system in women. It's so much easier for the immune system to be overactive. We can see that. The autoimmune rates in women are 70% higher than autoimmune rates in men. Now, they're increasing in men because of all the things we talked about, but there really is such a bigger immunological response. This is also the difference between a man flu and a woman flu. We always, he has the man flu. Well, poor thing. The men don't have the same immune systems we have. So they are actually that sick, even though they have the same bug. You're just fighting it differently. Women's immune systems, our chromosomes, they're better adaptive. They're better responsive, and they have a better memory as well. And so it's a beautiful thing. The issue is in pregnancy, it can become overactive and over responsive at times. And the body doesn't always want to have, a fetus. It doesn't always want to have sperm in it. And it can attack sperm. It can attack the egg. It can attack the fetus, which is why you'll see failed IVF is an immunological upregulation. We use a lot of things like rapamycin to sort of slow down, if you have on and off switches for the immune system, to slow down without immunosuppressing. We use a lot of low dose naltrexone, which can help the body really prevent miscarriage by preventing an immunological sort of uproar when the body does get pregnant. And then we also work on really retoggling the switches. So if you think about the immune system as a series of on and off switches, is a very easy way. On and off for inflammation, on and off for responsiveness, on and off for turning off. We have all these switches and they're a part of our genes. And through epigenetics, which is lifestyle stress, endocrine disrupting chemicals, toxins, mold, these genes can become more impactful.
Expressed or
More, I always say, kind of more impactful in your life than maybe if those weren't expressing themselves. And so when it comes to fertility, the immune system really needs to be back into a place of like calm. When I'm in a place of needing to respond, I'll respond, versus I'm always turned on and I'm always fighting. And we do that through some fasting, through a lot of deep immunological work, through immunometabolism. We can talk a little bit about Vidal too. Like, we work through some systems and we're addressing mainly immune system and hormonal dysfunction at the same time.
Yeah, I fundamentally, I think that's ultimately, if I was to sort of boil it down to just one or two things, I would say it was high levels of stress and then just a rubbish environment. I think those potentially are the two catalysts that then drive this sort of endocrine and immunological dysfunction. Just at every level, and it speaks to sort of, and I think it's a conversation again for another day, but it's where this idea of sort of adverse childhood events can also come into play, and that triggering this baseline immunological state that then sort of carries through the rest of life, which then puts an individual at risk for these immunological and inflammatory issues. I also think it's probably worth noting, just from a fertility point of view, that it's obviously all of these endocrine disrupting chemicals are causing a lot of precocious puberty in young girls. And if you're going to enter puberty earlier, you're sort of going to run through your ovarian reserve faster, and that's obviously a component thereof too. I mean, if you don't necessarily have the eggs available when you're trying to fall pregnant, then that too is something to sort of be aware of. So yeah, it is just so multifaceted, and it's why I sort of think why I'm such a fan of what you guys at Vidal are doing, because I can't think of anyone who takes such a personalized and sort of multifaceted approach to dealing with these sorts of issues, which is a perfect segue, and I don't get that right often, so I'm quite proud of that one, into what you guys do at Vidal and how you start to deal with these problems specifically. I mean, again, I will get back to you guys at some point, but specifically how you start to approach women's health issues, should we say, hence this being the topic of today's conversation. And how you approach these issues.
Yeah, great question. I'd start by saying we have our 4F process, which is kind of like what we're known for, which is flush, feed, function, and fast. But I would say that it's not like a course where like you do this step and that step and this step and that step. We always start pretty much with some form of flush, whether that's a low histamine, bacterial, immunological. We're working in the first phase of really opening up thyroid. We're stimulating the adrenals. We're stimulating thyroid, stimulating adrenals, opening up the lymphatic system, opening up the kidneys, opening up the liver. We're really working on increasing food during this phase as well. And we actually utilize a lot of juices during this phase, a lot of micronutrients during this phase, We eat a lot of food. People are always like, oh, it's a juice fast.
Carbs.
Yeah, carbs. It is not a juice fast. I promise you, you're going to be eating a lot of food. And we're really just pushing sort of a spike in insulin to drive down glucose and really have better glucose metabolism during this phase. Then we really go into the function phase. In the function phase, we're addressing underlying gut issues, leaky gut, gut dysfunction, SIBO, or just dysbiosis, which is just an imbalance, which could just be low bacteria as well. We're really utilizing also what I like to call metabolic flexibility. This is where we're really adjusting. The biggest thing for women is they get stuck being sugar burners. So what I mean is normally when you eat an apple, your blood sugar will go up. 2 hours after your blood sugar goes down, this is called your postprandial blood sugar. And then it should start going down and your body should turn on a mild amount of ketones, which is where it starts burning fat. And then it'll burn fat as energy until you eat again next time. And it's the body's natural system that occurs. This, we're born with this, which is why kids and young women can eat a lot more and maintain and not see issues, because their body is going into a fat burning zone. Every 2.5 hours, they're starting to burn fat again. And so that is how the metabolism works and how the body is regulated, sort of like homeostasis through time, inflammation, stress, and you name it, all the things we've talked about. Your body sort of gets stuck. And through high stress, you eat an apple, blood sugar goes up. When it starts to go down, because your body's so stressed, it doesn't want to diet, doesn't want to burn fat, so many reasons. Immune system is turned on. It needs to keep blood sugars high to keep running. Immune system runs off glucose. It will dump glucose in the system to re-regulate, and blood sugars will stay high. And so you never get into fat burning. And so when you're staying in places of high blood sugars, you also don't get into deep levels of cellular healing or autophagy, even when you're sleeping or times of resting. And when we're not getting through cellular cleaning, we really have an increase in what's called senescent cells. Senescent cells are just sort of like dysfunctional zombie cells, if you will, that really need to be cleaned up, but the body doesn't have the system set up to clean up those cells. And they release what's called cytokines, which create inflammation. So in this process of the function phase, we work on metabolic flexibility, making you a sugar and a fat burner. And we also work on this phase of some cellular cleanup as well. We really start to introduce fasting around this time. We'll go through cyclical, maybe around cycle. Maybe we're doing a once a week, 24-hour fast just to get deep cellular cleanup. But we can't do that. Hear me out. You cannot be fasting if you're not metabolically flexible, because what will happen is your fast will be a stress. Your blood sugars won't drop. Your ketones won't turn on, and you're just degrading muscle and you're creating a lot more havoc. You're wreaking havoc on your body during this time. So it's important to kind of work this system. And we have ways to track this. You've worked with us before. We're tracking glucose. We have systems in place to make sure we're actually getting the benefits before we put somebody into a fast. From there, we really start, okay, now that we've addressed the real underlying issue, because the underlying issue isn't hormonal dysfunction, it's why did the hormonal dysfunction happen? So now that we've addressed that, hormones by this time are already 10 times better. But now we can start really saying, okay, do we need to support detox better? Do we need to support, maybe we're going in with some HRT or bovines or products that stimulate a specific hormone to create more progesterone, to create more estrogen, to support more estrogen detox. This is our function phase. And so this is always really important. I would say this is the cherry on top. This is where we're starting to work on physique. This is sort of like you're healed and we're walking you back into the real world, if you will. And so we work in these phases specifically because one needs to occur for the next to occur. If the body is toxic and loaded, it will not decrease inflammation, which will not drop blood sugars, which will not create metabolic flexibility. So it's this system that we've really niched down. Are there other things that work? Sure. Dr. Pompa, Living Well. There are so many great systems out there. This is the system we find tried and true. We work with a lot of women on a very high level. We've got 15 coaches, and our coaches see anywhere from 80 to 60 clients, and we have guaranteed outcomes too in our program. We have an 85% success rate with our women in severe autoimmune cases, which is massive. When you're talking about actual healing from people who were told they would never be, these are lifelong diagnoses. Lupus, these are lifelong diagnoses. and they're completely recovered and they're living in full remission and they're feeling good. We don't heal, we don't cure. That these people find healing throughout themselves, lifestyle, stress. We're working a lot of mindset. We have our group coaching calls, which is such an important piece to work the psychological side of things alongside healing the body so that you can find a new level of living. Then you can sort of step out of the sick girl or guy era into like your strong guy or girl era or your fertile guy or girl era. And you can really sort of recover or find remission from the situations you were dealing with.
Yeah, no, it's a great system, and I'd say, and obviously I'm not getting paid to say this, but I think the fact that you deal with it at an immunological level is almost completely unique. I think most people just work upstream of that at a best case scenario, and they'll just focus on sort of, as we alluded to at the very beginning of this conversation, a lot of people, well, practitioners will start to look at the root causes being just fixing the thyroid or maybe just fixing the gut, but not looking upstream of that, maybe not looking at the nervous system, not looking at the immune system, which is fundamentally, as we talked about earlier, where all these sort of issues sort of really start to come into fruition, where they start to develop and when they start to become problematic. So, Sonia, I know we're starting to run up on time, but I think I would be remiss if we didn't have a quick conversation about HRT. I know that it's, again, something we've discussed previously, and it's definitely a bit controversial, especially when you start to sort of have the whole menopause, premenopause conversation there, whether a woman should sort of naturally go through menopause without HRT, or she should have it. And I think the same thing applies to men going through andropause as well. I'm of the opinion that anyone who is struggling should really consider HRT of any sort, whether that's thyroid, sex hormones, or because fundamentally we need these hormones, as we have now established, to function as human beings. And it's not just about aesthetics. It's and sort of libido and sexuality. It's about mental health. It's about neurological health. It's about cardiovascular health. When you're working with a client, obviously a woman in this case, when do you start to have that conversation? I know you generally, you obviously, you're not a medical doctor, but at Vidal do have doctors on staff, medical doctors on staff who can prescribe hormones. But what are your thoughts on this? And when do you get to the point where you would advise a woman who is struggling with her hormones to maybe consider HRT? And then beyond that, I'd love to have a quick discussion on the Dutch test, because as I was talking about earlier, I think it's a tool that just allows you to fine-tune an HRT protocol, and especially from a sort of an estrogen clearance standpoint. So yeah, I'll stop nattering now and let you answer. But how do you go about this with your female clients?
Great question. So I think you said it really well too. Like, there's no need to walk through life suffering. There's no badge that says I did this without HRT or I did this with HRT. Like, you don't get an award for, like, it's kind of like natural childbirth, like that's a bad, you're like, whoa, that lady gave birth naturally. No epidural. Like, that's crazy. No one is like, oh, they made it through perimenopause without progesterone. Like, wow, they're so incredible. Like, no, you think their poor husband or like their poor stress or their poor body went through so much. There are so many things to consider. I say one of the most important things is remember that a lab is a lab. How you feel is going to trump that. I have plenty of women who have very low progesterone who are postmenopausal and they're, or perimenopause, they're cycling every 4 months and they feel great. They don't have stress. They don't have anxiety. They're responding to basic weight loss protocols. They're doing fine. And in a case like that, I wouldn't say you have to have. I'd say if their sleep is good and their stress is good and their body is functioning fine, that's great. A lot of how a person transitions through perimenopause and postmenopause is really based on their life circumstances, how much they didn't set boundaries, their trauma, how much they didn't do for themselves, like the stress they've had in their lives, the stress they currently have. I would arguably say that someone who's transitioning through perimenopause, who's a nurse and worked night shift their whole life, versus somebody who is a stay-at-home mom and teaches yoga. Like, those are going to be very different outcomes of how they're transitioning. And we have to really understand that. So I think that sometimes we can get caught in labs and not how a person's feeling. And I really like to go off of how a person's feeling. I love HRT. I just think it's such a gift to the world for so many reasons. When it comes to fertility, I always like to go the natural route to bring it up, but I really do use progesterone in a lot of my infertile cases, because some of these women, what we don't always understand is getting pregnant can be healing to the body. You're eating more, hormones are higher when you haven't had them for so long, and they can re-regulate in the 9 months that you've had them again. They're re-regulating and your body is responding really well to them. So I do use progesterone in some of these cases, and I really like to use it to prevent miscarriage in women who don't have strong ovulations, because we want the corpus luteum is not so, it's kind of just like, it's like the volume is very low and it's not going to create a lot of progesterone, and it's not sure what to do. And when we support with progesterone and fertility, it can really prevent miscarriage on a high level. I've seen some fertility clinics, not ours, go up to even 400 milligrams of progesterone, which is a huge dose. I'd say it's arguably about four times what you normally want to use in a woman. And so I think it's beneficial there. I think when it comes to HRT in general, if I'm going to have a client do progesterone, a basic serum, meaning blood test, will do. I normally like to do 2 or 3 throughout a month versus just 1, because if they're having irregular cycles, you don't really know what their surge is looking like, but you can get a baseline from 2 or 3 very easily. Like, this person is not showing any signs of increased progesterone. If a person is showing increased signs of progesterone and their LH and FSH, which are hormones we look at in sort of looking at the youth of their, like, are they transitioning or not? Are they postmenopausal or premenopausal? If everything is low, I think more chronic stress. And I think, let me address stress first. If those things look normal and progesterone is still low, I'll go into prescriptive progesterone, maybe 50 milligrams. Again, we don't prescribe, our clinics do. So I really just let our clinics, they're world class, take care of that. And so that's probably around what they would use for a female who's still cycling. When it comes to estrogen, though, I personally never like to introduce estrogen without a Dutch test, for the very reasons you spoke of earlier. How estrogen is in the body is really how it's being recycled. If it's being recycled, I want the faucet to be on or off, right? And if we think about, the faucet is on most of our life. In perimenopause, it starts to turn down, and then in postmenopausal, the faucet turns off. Well, that's only the faucet. What about the drain? Because if we turn the faucet back on and the drain is clogged, or a person is not methylating, or a person is recycling estrogen, or they're growth promoting, we really do create more of a risk of long-term issues or severe reactions, heavy period, inflammation, a lot of dysfunction. And so understanding if the drain is open and the recycling of that estrogen is cleared, it's really key. Estrogen is one of those ones where you really need to be, I don't want to say you really need to be careful, because you don't need to be scared of estrogen and estradiol. They're so beautiful. Like I said, they're your serotonin, they're your vitality, they're your muscle, they're your metabolism, they're your cardiovascular health. But introducing a bioidentical hormone into the body when you don't know how it's going to react is something you really want to be cautious of. So again, working with the provider, getting a Dutch test. All over the world, you can get a Dutch test. They ship internationally, and you can have a provider go through it. Even if your provider doesn't, Dutch will recommend a provider that can give a reading on it. At Vidal, we work with people all over the world. They do a Dutch. We just provide feedback on their Dutch. So there's a lot of different avenues that you can go for that. When it comes to testosterone, again, how you feel. What do you want? If a person has a history of PCOS or some sort of cycle dysfunction, the Dutch test will also show us if they favor more of an alpha, meaning a strong response to androgens, or a beta, meaning a weaker response to androgens. But it's not necessarily needed, right? Because if a woman is most optimal between 30 and 40 testosterone, and they're at 11. Naturally, you can get them to a 20 or even a 22. That's doubling their testosterone. It's still only a 22. So you might, in that case, want to supplement. I would say some women burn through hormones a lot more, and some women are just wanting to perform better at the gym. They train hard. They're 55 and they love lifting weights and they love being active, and like, great, higher testosterone levels are going to help you maintain that. Yeah, it's really it's so dependent on a person. I always like to go through pros and cons with my clients because, again, it's very different, like with women in hormones than men, in the sense of, like, for women, if you start testosterone and then you stop, you're just going to go back to where you were. With a man, if you start testosterone and then you stop, you're going to be lower than where you were. So you need to buffer that a little bit more. But at the end of the day, hormones are so protective in our body that having bioidentical, and I stress the bioidentical side, having bioidentical hormones in the body to support, yeah, brain, heart, metabolism, muscle mass are important. Are they required? No. But if you were like, I want to live the longest, vitality is important to me, cognitive function is important to me, preventing osteoporosis is important to me, I have great grandkids I want to be around for, like, then HRT, even at a low dose, would probably be a route you want to look into.
You brought up a number of great points there, starting with the fact that I think that everybody should always first look to optimize their natural production by sort of getting to the root cause of whatever is behind the dysfunction of the hormones to begin with. And I think this is where functional medicine normally tends to fall short, is that you will go to your standard functional medicine provider and they'll just look at labs and say, well, your hormones are low. We're getting the root cause of it by giving you hormones. And I think what unfortunately most clinicians, coaches in this field fail to realize is that that's A, not sort of getting to the root cause of the problem, and B, if you are trying to sort of deal with the root cause of the problem, hormones are 9 times out of 10 the last thing that's going to respond, especially if there's a lot of inflammation, a dysregulated immune system, a number of infections. Hormones are adaptive. It's adaptive physiology. It's not broken physiology. Your physiology is responding to that state. So if you're in a state where there's a lot of inflammation in the body for whatever reason, your hormones are going to downregulate as a response to that. They're, as I've said, they're going to adapt. And I think people are just put onto these protocols far too quickly, and then they don't actually find any relief from their symptoms because the hormones aren't necessarily the issue. Or they are, but the bigger issue is potentially the mitochondrial dysfunction being driven by the screaming mold infection, for example. So I think that's definitely something for the audience to consider as well, is that hormones should definitely be looked at, but you should only do it when you sort of covered all your other bases. And I think what's also maybe pertinent for the audience to know, the listeners to know, and you can speak to this more than I can, but whenever I've sort of quote unquote counseled a woman in this regard, and she's still sort of ovulating, and she hasn't got to the point where she's going through perimenopause or menopause yet, I always try and get her. I always suggest, I should say, that she does start to do some regular blood work to see where her hormone levels are at. Because when you if a woman does go into menopause, I've just sort of found that it's very hard to determine her optimal levels because you don't have a baseline. And so many people just go through life obviously not having an idea of what their hormone levels should be. And for men, that's easy because you've only got 1 or 2 variables really to contend with, and that's testosterone and how much it's then going to aromatize or turn into estrogen, which you can. So there's only one main lever to pull. Whereas with women, you've got progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone, and obviously every woman is going to have unique levels of those hormones. So I think the younger a woman can start having these levels checked, it provides that longitudinal data going forward. So if you get to the point where you then choose to go on to, as a woman, obviously, onto HRT, you then have that benchmark established. And it just takes so much the guesswork out of trying to figure out what is ideal for you. So yeah, those are generally my feelings on it. And I think you also spoke to the longevity aspect of it. And ultimately, obviously, the science is divided there, and everybody in the longevity community is going to say the moment you touch an exogenous hormone, you're going to just turn mTOR on forever and you're going to be dead in 3 months. And you know what? That might be the case. You might knock off a year or two at the end of it. But I think if you do value your health, and you do value your health span, which is far more important, then it's for me anyway, it's worth the trade-off. I'm not Brian Johnson. I'm not trying to sort of to live forever. I don't think he's trying to live forever, to be honest. But I think that's definitely something to consider as well. At the end of the day, your longevity is important, but it's not as important as being healthy as your health span, the amount of time that you spend healthy while you're still alive. So I think those are obviously, just for the listeners, just all important, important points to consider as well. Sonia, I think we've covered just about all of it. There's just so much more I would like to go through, but I want to be respectful of your time. So I think
we'll have to do a part 2.
We will indeed. To end off I've just got a lightning round. I'd love to run through with you, if that's okay.
Yeah,
just some rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
I have yet to actually have a lightning round that was actually rapid, but we'll see where we get. But yeah, to start off with, what's the one woman's health myth that really needs to be debunked in your view?
That periods are it's normal to have a painful period.
Okay, that was nice and quick. Thank you. Perfect. What's the single biggest mistake women make regarding their health?
Ooh, I would say looking for a quick fix instead of the underlying issue.
Perfect. What's the one, and this is a controversial one maybe, the one nutrient every woman should focus more on?
I mean, I'd say omegas is kind of good, a well-rounded, consumed, can help with everything. I mean, we could go into B's and folates, but I'd say omegas are like, cool, we're good. Every woman needs them.
Sauna or ice bath?
Ice bath.
Fair enough. I thought you were going to say that. And cool. And the last one is, what's your go-to stress-reducing strategy for women?
Yeah, I'll give you 2. I think breath work and meditation can be great if a woman is even there, right? Some women, that's like, it's so annoying to them. I say, like, the one thing that's free is honestly just putting your hands on your heart, or just like touching your arms and closing your eyes and just giving a couple deep breaths between calls, before you have a stressful conversation, when you're in the car, before you're about to go into your house with your young kids running around. Just stop, just touch yourself for a couple minutes, like just rub your arms, hands on the chest, a couple deep breaths. And that is a free way to just, every time I do it, even as an example, I'm always like, oh, that felt so nice. It's just like a quick, free, easy 30 seconds to completely change the way your body's responding in that moment.
Yeah, that sort of somatic reintegration, just kind of coming back into sort of into contact with yourself.
Yeah.
Sonia, thank you so much for your time. You've been amazing. Where can people find you? I know obviously you're on Instagram and all of that, but where would you, if people do want to reach out, where can they find you?
Instagram is really the best way. So through our site, it's kind of like a little bit, you have to go through a couple processes to get to talk to me directly. If you go to my Instagram at Sonia Spil, no hyphens or anything, I have a link in there. You can book for a free discovery call, talk about what your case is, see if we're the right fit. I also have a podcast called Unnamed and Untamed that I did for 4 years. We have 50, 60, 70 episodes of women's health as well. And I'm always available for questions. People message me on Instagram all the time asking me something, or, hey, you mentioned this somewhere. Where can I find more information? And I love educating. It's my space. So there's that. And then if you are a coach or you're somebody who wants to learn more about this space, We do educate as well. I'm an educator at Metabolic Mentor University. So if you want to learn more about the things that we're talking about, you're like, wow, I want to bring this to my clients. I'm a personal trainer. I just want to know more for myself, and I want to do this to help people. Great. We have a space for you. We have 7 major courses that you can come in at any level and learn the basics all the way through the most advanced topics.
Perfect. We'll be sure to link that all in the show notes. Thank you just so much for your time and your knowledge. This has been an amazing conversation. I look forward to having more in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rob. Bye.